Hi Mahima, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm very well. How are you?
Really good, thank you. I really enjoyed our last conversation, leadership from the inside out. Got some really good feedback from that. And you just mentioned, yeah, you had some people giving you great feedback. So, yeah,
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for having me.
my pleasure. And today, it's something we talked about in between about talking about why the three principles, and we'll elaborate on that, why the three principles are a new paradigm in psychology. That is a grand statement, but also nothing new.
Hmm.
So we'll see where the conversation takes us. But for me, starting with, why for me 2 years ago, when I first read about the three principles in Mike O'Neill's book, The Inside Out Revolution, it touched something inside me that felt completely different to anything I'd studied in psychology, my training in therapy, and having read books like The Power of Now, studied elements of Buddhism, it just came with this feeling of like, that's it. That's the simplicity. That's how life really does work. But it touched something inside me that was less about, I get this intellectually now. Yeah, there was an element of that. It's like, oh, that's nice and simple. And simplicity is something I've always wanted in my life, really, rather than complexity. But so, this knowing that, yeah, that is how life works. And then for me, the insights I had about my relationship to my past, my relationship to my experience moment to moment, my ideas of who I was, it all fell away and settled very quickly. So for me, it was a very personal experience. I remember over a period of a month where it was, yeah, I had lots of strange dreams and just like everything felt okay. And there was this settling. And it's like, there is something here. This is completely new and different. Even though I've read it in different forms before, it was like this at its core offers something new. And when I say a new paradigm in psychology, some basic principles that describe how the human mind works.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to kind of recognize or remember um, for me is that the principles are a description. They're a description of what's already happening. And so much of it can feel familiar or intuitively kind of like, yeah, I knew that. Because they're not a conceptual framework for you to then impose on life and apply there so that you can make your life fit the theory of this, what this is talking about. But it's a description. So it's already that way. It's already true for you. And it's just a question of whether you'll see that or when you'll see that it's already true, which is what we mean by insight, that an information consumption about the three principles framework isn't really going to be transformative for you unless you have just a direct personal recognition um, of, yeah, that's how it works, that's how it worked this right now, that's what happened. So unless you have that, you kind of, you don't benefit from learning this, which is why sometimes we come across it, and one day it just looks different, one day life just looks different. um, so I guess there's two things I'm really highlighting here. The first is it's a description. It's not a theory, it's not a concept, it's not, it's something that's just telling you what's happening kind of under the hood of your mind,
Mm.
which is why much of it feels familiar and intuitive. And the second is that because it's not a theory, absorbing it at an information level doesn't do anything, but that having a direct personal insight or experience is radically transformative.
Yeah, I really like that. When you talk about describing, there's various ways we talk about it in the three principles, whether it's describing, the three principles, the invisible principles of mind, the intelligence behind all things, consciousness, the awareness we have, and that brings to life all our experiences, and the missing link of thought, that world of thought that we use to sculpt to sculpt our experience moment to moment, to have different thoughts, to have different experiences, and those three principles combining together. That for me, it's like, that's simplicity. That's really helpful. Three different ways about talking about the same thing. That the mind really is only working one way. So when we say, you know, for anyone watching, well, the mind only works one way, from the inside out. Inside the logic of the three principles that describe all human experience, that our thoughts are taking form moment to moment, and our feelings are letting us know we're having that experience. But the big thing for me is that I'd been living my life until a few years ago, and despite everything I'd learned, not seeing, believing that the outside world could cause me to feel something without my thinking being involved. And that was the big thing for me, is that, well, I can explain how the mind works, or actually the brain works, and how people think, how we look at meaning, create meaning, and we look for cause and effect. But until this was revealed to me through insight, like you said, I hadn't seen that I was living in this outside-in world. And I guess it was a bit of a shock at first, but it was like, well, this makes so much sense. I love what you said about when it touches something that it's like we've forgotten. We know this. And interesting your perspective on when insight comes, the quality it has. For me, there's a quietness. There's less going on in my mind. I'm curious about that, so I haven't had to work stuff out. Insight has come from somewhere else.
Yeah, and also, I mean, a part of insight for me has been the capacity of awareness, or consciousness as we call it, which is the capacity to see your habits of thinking. And that the seeing of it is the undoing itself. You know, that there isn't a second step that I saw something I was doing that made me really kind of just really worked up about a person. And then I saw that and I thought, oh, no, there's nothing that you can do that forces me to think a certain way. And so that has to be of my own volition, that somehow I'm doing this myself. And that the capacity to see that is such a gift to me, because it then means you have the freedom to move out of that and to find a new experience and a new world of how to live your life. So insight to me is so tied up to that gift of consciousness, to become aware of something, to see something that you never saw before, to see something be visible that had been invisible to you your whole life. So to me, that has a lot to do with insight. And that's why there's nothing to do for it, because when you can't see it, you can't see it. So there's nothing you can do because you can't see it. You don't even know it's there. And then when you see it, there's nothing further to do about that, because you've already seen that. And the nature of the human mind, we're saying, is that it will naturally move away from suffering. It will move towards health. It will move towards healing. It will move towards positive momentum. The minute you're able to see your thinking as thought, you then have the freedom to move in another direction.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like, it's that seeing. And we all get caught out. I'm going to go out for the rest of the day and get caught out constantly. And when I say caught out, yes, I've been conditioned, and all my habitual thought patterns and everything that's happened to me from the day I was born has conditioned me to innocently believe that the outside is causing my experience. And when you said that seeing, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend last night, having some challenges at work. And yet, there is an opportunity in any situation. That's why, you know, in this community, we talk about thriving in any circumstances. And then obviously we've all got our blind spots and our exceptions, like, no, but you can't thrive there. But it is that capacity for seeing in that moment, which we would call it a rising consciousness, as in, I'm getting caught out again. And I call it catching. That's what a lot of people I work with, it feels like the initial starting point is getting people in touch with their moment-to-moment experience. And seeing how, almost like in our day-to-day experiences, there are these opportunities for it to be revealed, how our mind is working and how we innocently do fall for what you were just describing. But in any moment, we can lift out of it through seeing, through insight, sight from within. And that, it's like, when I was trained in therapy and hypnotherapy, we talked about people living in trance states. And it's a nice way, we do walk around in various trance states. We ignore certain things, we have amnesia, we have innocent beliefs about our circumstances that filter all our experiences. Well, that's a certain level of consciousness. And for me, going back to my initial experiences, there was a waking up to my experience. And the freedom that came with that, okay, I am only ever living in a world of my own thinking. And it's the extent to which I am seeing that. We all lead our life. We've got jobs, we've got relationships. But it was beautiful the way you said it, is that it's almost like we can have a situation that causes stress, anxiety, something. And it's almost like we fixate on it. It's like we freeze frame it. And it suddenly has this power. But life is constantly moving. And for me, the principles describe that flow of life. They describe, like many traditions, how there is only ever this present moment unfolding. And it's when we don't see that, people talk to me, say, I need to do some more mindfulness. I need to get more into the present moment. Well, I point people to the fact that you've only ever got the present moment. And it's through your understanding of how experience is unfolding moment to moment that you will become more full of mind.
Yeah, and also, I think a kind of a big difference between the principles as a paradigm in psychology. I think a big difference there is the fact that it's a description, so that when you get angry at somebody, it's not telling you you should get angry or you shouldn't. It's not saying become more assertive or go to anger management. It's not telling you anything about those things. It's not telling you, there's no judgment call over there about, you should be sad now or you shouldn't. There is this process of grieving and you should be right about step 4 by now. There isn't any kind of prescription that the principles are giving you. All they're saying is that if you feel mad as hell right now, this is why you're mad. And if you feel really upset and depressed, this is why you're really upset and depressed. And if you feel insecure and unable to focus, this is why you feel insecure and unable to focus. It's not telling you about whether you should focus or shouldn't, whether you should get more angry or less. It's not telling you anything about those things. It's simply explaining to you what's happening, so that should you want to change it, should you not like the feeling you're living in, it's telling you where you should be looking.
Yeah, and that is about an understanding, isn't it? Because often, let's say I work with someone, or even my own experiences, there were certain things in my past I was still slightly resentful for, or it felt like they had shaped this version of me now. And you can say that is actually true when you live in that misunderstanding, which is completely innocent. And for, when I work with people, it's like, yeah, but it was a really difficult childhood. I was bullied. I wasn't loved in the way that people I now see who are happy and healthy and have good relationships. So it looks like the cause and effect, which psychology and psychiatry actually work with, is that, okay, yeah, your behaviors now and your ways of thinking have been caused by your past or your experiences. So therefore, we need to help you change the way you think, see things in a different way, and have more useful behaviors. And that definitely helps people. But it's still missing something. And when it doesn't help someone, or there is a lack of, say, sustainability, and there's always something there. For me, the missing link for anyone who is still struggling to let go of something, it is through that misunderstanding. That, for me, is why we can describe the three principles as offering a paradigm, some basic underlying principles to inform basically all of psychology and psychiatry, which are there to help people have happier and healthier lives.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think the fact is, everybody I know who's either in therapy or in counseling or in psychotherapy, who are in those professions, the fact is that they have a real kind of goodwill for their clients, and they have a real desire to understand people and to help people. And equally, it's also true that we will always be doing what we know at the moment. And what we will always be acting out of our own understanding at the moment. So in my mind, for those fields to have kind of a large scale transformation, it has still got to come from personal experience. It has still got to be that people in these professions for themselves first experience the potential of human beings to change. And experience psychological freedom for themselves under any circumstance, because then it changes the basis from which they will work with their clients. Then it changes what they teach and how they help their clients. And I think one of the reasons with principles-based work, we see such big shifts for people, we see such huge transformations possible for people so quickly, is that we have something going for us, which is that it's already that way, right? So we haven't got to make something be a way that it isn't, because that's hard and that takes time. But what we have going for us is that it is already that way, so that even somebody in the thick of a fit of anger already has health within them, and already has within them the capacity to break out of that cycle and to take positive steps in their life. They already have it. So I haven't got to manufacture it and kind of implant it in their brain. They already have within them kind of a movement towards health. And all I have to do then is to remind people and invite them to experience a freedom that's already there in them.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, often I find myself pointing people to when they do have that freedom. Those quieter times in their mind, those times when they do feel more at peace. And okay, what often happens then is then people innocently attach it to their circumstances.
Yes.
Which seems like such a good idea at the time. This is why I'm feeling happier. But then people go chasing that, whether it is because they went on a spiritual retreat up in the mountains, or they went for a walk in the park, or they got away from a situation that they innocently thought was causing them to feel bad. And I'm not saying there aren't difficult circumstances, situations that I would prefer not to be in, absolutely. But what you're saying there, and it's something I see more and more, what Sydney Banks talked about, we are all one thought away from peace of mind. If we let the intelligence of the mind do its work for us, that inbuilt capacity to restore equilibrium and balance. Now, for me, when I was initially looking in this direction, it's like, well, that's helpful. That's going to help in stressful situations. When I'm getting angry at my computer or someone let me down in some way. And that was one of the big impacts for me. It's like, I'm not getting disappointed with people so much. I understand what's going on here. But what he was really saying, and I'm seeing more deeply now, is that, well, that one thought can be something that can change your entire life. for someone who maybe has suffered years of misery, addiction, depression, there is a thought, that capacity for that one thought, whether it's into the nature of one's experience, a knowledge you have deep within you already, and therefore that's why it's available, or a thought that completely sees through the illusion of the old habitual thoughts one has been carrying around. And it's amazing, because I'd be fascinated, right? So this is, won't go off our conversation, the idea that when people do have these spontaneous moments of enlightenment from within, or when they become completely free and they weren't expecting it, kind of thing, or maybe they were looking in this direction. For example, they were getting a treatment at a specialist addiction center that works with the principles. If you wired them up then, and what was going on, in their neurobiology, one insight that supposedly all those neural connections, all these habitual things stored in the brain some way, bang, a complete factory default reboot and resetting. I'm really interested in the scientific aspect of that. The anomaly of like, wow, if that can happen for one person, surely it can happen for anyone.
Yeah, also I think ultimately change is always spontaneous. I think whether you're looking in this direction or not, it's always kind of instant and spontaneous, in that literally 1 second you're like that, and in another second you see something differently. So whether it's when you get really caught up and stressed out about something, and then you remember, oh wait, but it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. There's no physical piece of paper on my table that could actually get in my bloodstream and make me feel a certain way. That thing has to be done by me, right? So ultimately, that shift happens in an instant. And that shift is spontaneous in that it's not in my conscious control. I can't will something in me to change, like by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. That shift is always spontaneous.
Yeah, and that capacity for fresh thinking. I say to people often, imagine if it didn't work this way. What kind of world would we live in? Be a crazy, dangerous world. We'd have to walk around in armor. What, you can make me feel a certain way, even via the internet from Nepal. Anything you say can cause me to feel something. Oh my God, I'm going to have to be on red alert. And it's looking at that capacity for fresh thought. It's like, well, you know, if I said to someone, you don't have as much capacity for fresh thought as someone else. And it's pointing to that design in the system. You know, anyone looking, when we talked at the start about, this is a new paradigm, but it's nothing new. A lot of spiritual teachers, wise people through the ages have all been pointing in this direction. They've just used different language. They've talked about mind and all the different words you could associate with the intelligence behind everything. And they've talked about consciousness and that experience of life and levels of consciousness. And obviously in Buddhism, as you move up towards nirvana and all that. But what about that role of thought and the capacity for insight we all have? What about the simple living truth that we as human beings are only ever feeling our thinking moment to moment, but innocently forgetting it all the time? And when we innocently forget it, we block off that capacity for fresh thought.
Yeah, I mean, also when time, it's kind of nothing new. I think there's truth to that. I think there's half truth to that, right? Because in some ways, a lot of things that we talk about in the principles sound familiar to people. Like when you're in a fit of rage, you think it's reasonable to say and do certain things that when you're calm, you kind of think, no, that was way out of line. unthinkable to you otherwise. And so when we talk about some of those things, some of it feels intuitive, like, yeah, I know that. That's why we say take a deep breath, count to 10, sleep on it. All these things we say is because somewhere in there we have understood that our mind can kind of play tricks with us, and they can make us think things and do things that otherwise are completely unreasonable and uncalled for, right? At the same time, that pool of kind of common sense and intuitive advice is kind of really muddy with a lot of things that are not really true. So it's true in this case but not in that case, like say, like, love thy neighbor, right? Yeah, sometimes, but in other cases not really, and it makes no difference. And then, like, sleep on it. Well, sometimes a decision is urgent, and what are you going to do then? And what if you wake up the next morning and you're still as upset as when you went to bed, right? So there's all these inconsistencies in those kind of common sense pieces of advice. It doesn't really give us any way to sift through that advice and let kind of the true ones rise to the top, because it's all mixed up. So it's like, well, it has all these exceptions, and it has, well, in this case, but not there, and sometimes, and maybe. There's all of this confusion around there. Whereas to me, what's radical and new with the principles is that it gives you a definite discriminator, that life is either inside out or it's not, right? And if it is inside out, it means certain things. There are certain implications to how you live your life, if life is indeed inside out. And if it isn't, it means certain other things. It means we're always going to be at the victim end of life, right? Because life happens, we can't control it, we can't do anything about it. We spend all of this energy trying to control it. Why? Because we think it can make us feel a certain way, right? And because we think our instability or insecurity comes from something out there. So it means very different things for how we live our lives if we think life works one way versus another. And to me, the logic of that and the cleanness of that takes away so much of the noise and clutter that's in kind of the obvious common sense advice in life. So yeah, good.
No, absolutely. It's what you said there. It's the judgment people have. And this is where, what you talked about there is the implications of the understanding of how life works. So someone might follow a spiritual teacher or a particular spiritual tradition, or they may own 100 self-help books and have various approaches to becoming a better person, becoming the best version of themselves, evolving, very focused on behavior or changing the way they think and living mindfully. There's a lot of doing, and it can be hard work. And when I talk to people, it works for a certain time, but then it doesn't. And then they feel like they've got to get back on the horse. It's like, I'm getting there. It's like there is a destination to get to. And by the time I get to there, I am going to be more enlightened, or I am going to be happier. We're just saying it's not that. Or if we keep looking for it, or we feel like we've got to work at it. No, these are descriptions, just like you said, which have implications, which I know that, when I work with people over a period of time, the implications then show up. I always point people to the fact that life is your feedback mechanism. You have capacity for insight and wisdom, and to deepen your understanding of how life really works every minute of the day. But the point is, we've got busy lives. People have got families and jobs. But when we find ourselves getting caught out and ultimately thinking and behaving in a way that would suggest our consciousness has descended and we are not seeing that it only works one way, bang, there's an opportunity there. But it's that simplicity, isn't it? So there is a common sense element, but it's not common sense advice we're pointing to.
Yeah. Yeah, and also we're pointing to a logic that you can bank on, we're pointing to something that is going to be true for you like 100% of the time. So there's never going to be a situation where there's an exception. There's never going to be a situation where you say, okay, not here. Here I have to look somewhere else for a solution because it's not going to come from me. So there isn't any of that. So for me, there is a real dependability to understanding the principles, which is it tells you what's true all the time. You're having difficulty with your husband, it tells you what's going on. You're having difficulty with a challenge at work, you're having difficulty making a decision on how to navigate career. In all of those things, it's telling you that there's a variable at play here that's kind of distorting what you see, and you haven't noticed the variable. So it looks to you like that thing out there is a problem, or that thing out there is a challenge, or it's a hurdle, or it's a setback, and you haven't accounted for the fact that there's kind of a variable in here that's changing how that thing looks to you.
Yes, exactly. And I think beginning to sum up really, but it's that it's always worked this way since we evolved, since the dawn of time. These invisible principles, well, I don't know where they were. They didn't just come into being. Gravity's been taking, well, it's been shaping the universe and shapes our experience of life on Earth, keeps us on the ground. And it does. What way? Go on, yeah.
Yeah, I think the advantage of it being a description is that it explains what was already here. It was here before Sydney Banks, who kind of first expressed it in this way. It was here before he expressed it. He understood what it was. He understood the logic behind them. And he understood how to articulate it in a way that we could understand and benefit from. But he didn't kind of just make that up and impose a theory on life and say, hey, you believe this and you act in accordance with these good ideas and your life will get better. That's not what the point was. The thing is, it was a description of something that was always there, that he also didn't know, that was invisible to him too, before he had his insight and saw it. So being a description means it takes all of this pressure off you to do anything, because it's saying, if you're a human being, you already work that way. That's it. You can't make yourself work more that way or less that way. That's already how you work.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think that's a nice way to end, really. And for anyone watching this who's maybe a bit newer to this understanding, it's the implications as they then pan out. Whether you search out a teacher, a coach, or read books, look at other resources. It's just that ongoing journey. It's not about getting it. I work with a lot of people. It's like, I've got it, then I didn't get it. Well, that's the nature of the beast, if you like. And it's being okay with that. So it's exactly what you said, Mahima. There's nothing to do. And it's so hard to describe in words the way, the depth to which you see it, it can go deeper, deeper, deeper. And I think it probably is infinite within one's lifetime. And if I keep looking in this direction, well, I know there's implications for my life, but there's also implications for those I'm helping in my work. And that's it, really. There's nothing else there. It's like, so when Sid Banks talked about that isness of life, this is it. He was pointing towards the answer is always within you. Whatever you were looking for, it is there. Any final thoughts?
Not really, except for your listeners to just kind of take this conversation as an invitation, and just check for themselves what's going on in their life, and where was, particularly when they feel really kind of compelled and negative about things, check for themselves whether there's a role their thought is playing in there or there isn't.
Mm, that's beautiful. Yeah, what their state of mind is in that moment, and whether they innocently think in that moment that something other than thought is creating that experience. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Mahima.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you for having me again. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure. See you again soon.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.